I approached Chairman Brescia about forming an opioid subcommittee to raise awareness to this epidemic in Orange County. And that's exactly what we're doing. And we can't do it without your help. And there are a lot of people here today that I hope to recognize without leaving anyone out. Today we have families standing with me here today, to my left and my right, parents who have lost a loved one, family members who have lost a loved one to this ugly and growing opioid epidemic. Fellow lawmakers, state and local, are with us here today, and I'm going to charge them with their first duty of the year as they take office in Albany. We have our district attorney's office well represented here with Mr. Bob Conflitti, who I can't thank enough for coming to our opioid subcommittee and presenting this piece of legislation that we're about to pass here today. Our sheriff is here, Sheriff Du Bois. We couldn't have a better sheriff in Orange County, out there day in, day out, fighting the fight, and his men are truly the boots on the ground in all of our law enforcement agencies throughout the county. Our commissioners of health and mental health are here today. Great organizations like 20Dec, Catholic Charities, Orange Regional Medical Center, Friends of Recovery, and a lot more are all stakeholders in this epidemic. Our community coalitions, Tri-County is here, Warwick is here, Greenwood Lake is here, Port Jervis, Middletown, Newburgh, Minisink, growing numbers. These are the people that are front and center. My good friend Annette Cars is here today. Annette is the one that I was connected with as I began my campaigning and learned of this epidemic, but also 32 years of teaching. To date, I've seen 11 of my former students perish to this ugly epidemic. Mr. Bob Began is a parent of one of my former students here today. I won't ask you to raise your hands how many of you know of somebody that's affected by this epidemic, because every hand in the room will go up. But having lunch with a friend of mine the other day, she passed something that was very telling. I want to share it with you. We were talking about the opioid epidemic, and her nephew has an affliction. And she said, isn't it kind of odd that people in our world today, in America, are offended by statues? Poor Gandhi is the latest victim. And the schools will be scurrying now to get Gandhi out of the books. But why aren't they scurrying to do something about this? Or people that are offended by saying, Merry Christmas. Well, I've got my Christmas tie on today. Shouldn't we be offended by the over 500,000 Americans that have perished from opioid and fentanyl-related overdoses? Shouldn't we be offended at that? Shouldn't we be offended at 70,000 Americans that will die this year alone? Shouldn't we be offended at 102 and growing, the year's not over yet, Orange County residents who have died at the hands of this wicked scourge? Shouldn't we be offended at cheap and plentiful deadly fentanyl that's flooding into our towns? Shouldn't we be offended by gummy bears and gummy worms laced with this garbage getting into our schools and into the hands of our children? Shouldn't we be offended at a governor who last year said marijuana is a gateway drug, but today wants to legalize it for the sake of tax dollars, $1.3 billion? Drug dealing to me. Shouldn't we be offended at that? I think we all should. At a recent conference in Boston, U.S. Surgeon General Jerome Adams encouraged local control and local innovation for dealing with this epidemic. He further stressed that law enforcement, healthcare groups, community organizations, and others should collaborate together in order to effectively combat this deadly crisis. In Orange County, we're doing just that. With our coalitions, with our health commissioner, mental health commissioner, our district attorney, our sheriff, my fellow legislators standing behind us, we're doing exactly that. Today, we're going to add to those efforts with the help of our district attorney's office, Mr. Bob Conflitti, and we're going to pass a resolution recognizing analogues, so I'm going to allow Mr. Conflitti to speak on, to be added to a list of deadly drugs, to the state list, and criminalize them. We have several elected officials here today. We have Carl Brabenick, we have Jonathan Jacobson, we have a representative, Gene Gallagher, from Aileen Gunther's office. We've heard from Mr. Skoufis, Senator-elect, Ms. Metzger, Senator-elect, who are willing to take this fight to Albany where it belongs. But it starts here. It starts locally. It starts with those coalitions. It starts with those legislators. It starts with everyone in the room to raise awareness. Let's be offended at the right things, not my Christmas tie, please. Let's be offended and let's call for action. The Surgeon General's right. It starts locally. Let's start locally. Mr. Conflitti, can I ask you to come forward and explain in legal terms? And again, please give Bob a round of applause. Starting with
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it. The issue here is that law enforcement is continuously falling behind people that are selling drugs to people and killing them. In order for law enforcement to prosecute anyone for possession, sale, manufacture of any substance, the substance has to be listed on a set of specific schedules in the public health law. The problem is that the drug chemists, the illegal drug chemists, are ahead of us. Every time we criminalize something by putting it on the right schedule in the public health law, they change the chemistry a little bit so that it's not a substance that's listed there any longer. Law enforcement's hands are tied at that point. We're not able to prosecute anyone for possession, sale, manufacture of those substances unless they're listed there. The biggest problems happening these days with fentanyl. Fentanyl is fentanyl, it is a lawful, it's a controlled substance. It's listed on one of those schedules, Schedule 2. If a person has a proper prescription, it can be legally possessed, used, sold, manufactured, whatever the case might be. The issue is that those out there selling drugs that are killing people are changing the chemistry on fentanyl just a little bit, so it's no longer listed in the public health law, and they're ahead of us. Every time we add another fentanyl, the analog is the technical term for what that, fentanyl with a little bit of changed chemistry. Every time we add a fentanyl analog to the public health law schedules, they change it a little bit. So we can't do anything with that drug until the legislature catches up. As I'm sure we all know, legislative action is slow. It's difficult for us to stay ahead of people out there selling death in many ways, unless we get ahead of the curve, get ahead of the drug dealers out there. The resolution that the legislature intends to pass today, I brought this idea to Mr. Sasse's attention maybe a month or so ago. The idea here is that we would like to see the state legislature amend the public health law in a way that keeps us ahead of the illegal drug dealers. The recommendation we have in the resolution is to amend the public health law to basically parrot federal law. Under federal law, the federal attorney general has the authority to change their version of the public health law administratively. And what they've done at the federal level is defined fentanyl-related substance to mean fentanyl plus any of 5 chemical tweaks on fentanyl. Anything that's fentanyl or modified by one of those chemical changes qualifies as a controlled substance under federal law. So all we're asking the legislature to do here, state legislature to do here, is just to conform New York law to federal law, so that people who are selling, manufacturing, possessing those illegal or those currently are legal substances, so that we law enforcement can do something about those substances. This problem, it sounds kind of like an esoteric problem, except when you realize that of the 102 people that Mr. Sasse mentioned who died this year so far in Orange County of opiate overdoses, 18 of them died, at least in part, from one of these fentanyl analogs that was not illegal for them to be sold to them at the time that they took the drug. So it has real-world consequences, what we're talking about here today. Frankly, I think it's a small part of the problem, but it's a part of the problem that we can solve with very simple legislation that we're calling on the state legislature to pass. Legislation, this idea has been floated before by the governor, and so far the state legislature hasn't acted. We're calling on them to do that today.
Great. Thank you, Bob.
How was that?
Perfect.
30 seconds,
Legislator Sassy, I apologize for being a few minutes late. We're getting a verdict in a major case next door as I speak. I can't commend the legislature enough for taking this action. It's about time that we put a little pressure on Albany. I know we have some representation here from our people from Albany. This needs to be done. Just recently, the District Attorneys Association, I'm the first vice president of that for the state. We put out on our Facebook page a lot of Bob's work. I have to commend Bob for what he has done. It's good to have a good staff, and Bob took this project that we talked about maybe 6 weeks ago, and he really got it up and running. At least one of those 18 cases could have been prosecuted in this county if it was on the schedule, a Schedule 2 listed. The analog was a Schedule 2 drug. That's what's a shame in all of this. And you may think it's only one, but that's one family, that's one person that meant something to someone. And yes, it probably only would have been a drug sale charge, but it would have held somebody accountable. The fight against the opioid epidemic has to be multi-pronged, multifaceted. You have to have education and prevention. You have to have treatment, and you have to have enforcement. And very shortly, you'll be seeing an op-ed coming out from me that talks about we need more money for education and prevention and more money for enforcement. Treatment is needed. It's complicated. It's complex. It's individual. But we have to do all of it equally. And you cannot just forget about education and prevention. 30 years ago, we didn't wear seatbelts. 30 years ago, smoking didn't cause cancer. 30 years ago, heart disease, we didn't have cardiovascular activity. All of these things have been beaten or reduced through public awareness campaigns and through education and prevention. This epidemic can be handled the same way. It's the people that haven't gotten addicted, their parents, the kids, that we need to reach now to prevent that from happening. It's much easier to prevent something than to treat something once it happens. That doesn't mean that we don't treat the people that need help. We do that, and it doesn't mean that we stop enforcing. But again, I commend Mr. Sassy, I commend the legislature, all of them for taking this action, and I hope that the people in Albany, our senators and our assembly men and women, take the time to pass this and allow either the Attorney General, the Governor, the Commissioner of Health, someone to administratively be able to regulate this so that the one person in this county that should be prosecuted can be prosecuted. Thank you.
Sheriff, you want to say a few things?
Just a few. I won't hold you up here. You know, Rob said something really interesting. I don't know, he said it about maybe 20 times that we shouldn't be offended. You know, a year and a half ago, I called this a crisis and an epidemic, and some people criticized me for saying that. I was offended because it is. You got to call it what it is. And it's gotten worse. There's more deaths this year in Orange County than there was last year. Only a few, but it's still there. Personal experience, when Rob said people raised their hand about somebody that was affected. About 2.5 years ago, I had a parent come to me and said, I'm just waiting for the phone call. I don't know what it is. I can't get through to my son. He got the call this year, the day before Father's Day. It's affected all of us. And for Albany to think it's not a crisis or to be offended by calling it a crisis or an epidemic, they ought to get different jobs. But thank you for your time. It is a crisis. It is an epidemic. I'm on record for saying it for years. And it's about time Albany does something about it, and we keep up with the drug makers and with the chemists and whatever the terminology is. You know, you got to give us the tools. But I agree with the district attorney also. We have to have a combination of parenting, education, treatment, and enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Good morning. I am offended also. When we have desperate times, we need to find hope within that desperation, and this gives me hope. In the world of addiction, stigma is what has kept people from accessing care. It is what's kept people quiet from talking about struggles of their loved ones or their struggles themselves. By standing here together, we reduce some of that stigma today, and I thank you all for that. Legislator Stassi for leading this subcommittee. And I have to mention our County Executive, Steve Newhouse, who's represented today by Harry Poor here and Justin Rodriguez. But a year ago, we embarked on a journey to change our ecosystem around substance abuse disorder, and we will be making a report January 18th that talks about all of the changes that have happened across this county. We have increased the number of deaths, and every death, one death is too many, but we have not doubled from year to year as some other communities have seen, because we have committed stakeholders, as you see here in this room, who have been working together to make a difference, who have been increasing the prevention, increasing the Narcan on the street, promoting medication-assisted treatment, which is the best practice intervention for those who are struggling, and really working towards treatment on demand. In January, we will open a comprehensive call center that will be co-located with the Emergency Operations Center. That will be a number that anyone in this county can call to get an evaluation, to get connected, to get a warm handoff, to have a peer come and meet them where they're at and support them in beginning their recovery process. That is made possible by all of the stakeholders across this county working towards alleviating some of the desperate times that we've experienced under this opioid epidemic. And that call center can be reached by calling 1-800-832-1200. It's operated by the Mental Health Association, and they will be a single point of access to connect people to service and care. We, all of us, have been out in this community talking to the residents of our community, and so many say, I didn't know where to go to get help. We don't want to hear that. We know where to go to get help. We want to be sure our community knows. So I thank you all for the work that you'll do, and hopefully you can be with us on January 18th at the Emergency Operations Center to hear the update of all the work that our stakeholders have been doing. Thank you.
Carl.
You two guys here together.
Yeah.
First, I want to thank the District Attorney's Office, the Department of Health, and the Legislature for bringing this to the attention of the public. I will sponsor this legislation in Albany when I'm up there in the majority. I've spoken to Assemblywoman Aileen Gunther, who said she would join on this fight, as well as Senators-elect Skoufis and Metzger. I want to say firmly, this is not a Democratic or Republican issue. This is not an upstate or downstate issue. This is not a city, suburban, or rural issue. This is all of us. It is a human issue. That's what we have. It's a health issue. So this, I think, will get great support up in Albany and will pass. And I think it will cross all party lines and all regions of the state. I appreciate the comments, how this is part of the mix that has to be done to fight this epidemic. It can't only be an enforcement, it has to be education, it has to be treatment, but it doesn't mean that you don't have enforcement and that you don't fill the loopholes that you have in this situation. So I thank you for inviting me here. I will sponsor this legislation in January, and good luck and keep up the good work. And one more thing, I want to thank the families that are here, because they've been on the front line. I've had clients that have died from overdose. So it's so important, because we have to remember, this is just not it's not a legal issue, it's a human issue, and you've been affected. So we remember that. Thank you.
As we've heard, the acronym is TREAT. It's Treatment, Recovery, Education, and Enforcement. In the past 4 years that I've been in Albany, I've seen us take steps for treatment and recovery. We've been very proactive with that. But now it is time that we focus also on education and enforcement, as our law enforcement officials have said today at our district attorney's office. We are able to do this. We can do this together. We have a great Hudson Valley delegation from the east to the west, and we will be happy to sponsor this. I will co-sponsor this legislation with Assemblyman Jacobson, and we will push this forward with the Speaker and the Senate and try to get it through to the Governor and get this in the books and as reality. So I want to thank, again, all the families that are here today. I also want to thank the legislature for bringing this to our attention, and we will be making this a priority in the new year. So thank you very much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our press conference today. Again, I want to thank everyone for being here. Remember, this disease knows no race, it knows no religion, knows no socioeconomic status. It knows nothing except death. So let's work together. I look forward to 2019, expanding my opioid subcommittee to raise awareness to the epidemic here in Orange County. You've heard from our elected officials here today, our state elected officials. We need your help in putting pressure on those elected officials in Albany to act on this and on similar measures to combat this epidemic. Thank you very much, and thank